All righty, we are back with another episode of Sports to Suits Live, where I, Amanda Banks, weekly host former athletes that are killing it in business and leveraging their backgrounds in sports to see success in their business roles. And so I am super excited this week to have somebody that I met via LinkedIn, a couple months ago. So we're still just getting to know each other a little bit. But I've got my friend Lewis Burnham on the line. Lewis, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So when you pop in, definitely let us know where you're tuning in from. I always love to see where people are tuning in from because we have people from all over the world that watch this show on a weekly basis. So it's super fun for me to know where you're tuning in from, and definitely feel free to drop some questions. There are so many fun things that I want to dig into today. But if you have a question, definitely let us know what your questions are because we would love to keep you guys engaged and also follow both of our pages so you can see when we're going live again in the future. But Lewis, as I'm checking in on everything, why don't you give the audience a little bit of a background about yourself so they can get to know you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey started in undergrad as an athlete at the University of North Carolina, where I was a football player. When I left college, I actually went into education and I became an algebra teacher at the high school level, a head
Oh,
football
wow.
coach, yep, and an athletic director. And I spent about 7 years in the public education space until my wife and I decided to start a family, and it was time to move on and go after different endeavors. At which point, I went into the medical technology and medical device space and spent about 6 years in sales, sales leadership, business development, and really learned a ton in the business world. Along that journey, I was introduced to entrepreneurship and working with startups. And for me personally, I just saw a ton of parallels between the things I loved about teaching and I loved about coaching and I loved about mentoring. I saw the ability to do some of those similar things in working with early stage startups and early stage entrepreneurs, really people with some audacious goals that just needed a little help on their path to get there. And so at that point, I decided to go into venture capital, but had to find a way to get there. So I went back to business school, spent about 18 months doing fellowships and internships, and eventually landed where I sit today, which is as an investor with Idea Fund Partners. We're an early stage VC firm based out of Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. I sit in Boca Raton, actually. Um, and we invest in B2B enterprise SaaS products, early stage. And I also get the opportunity to work with awesome founders and companies through Embark Collective, which is a startup hub and innovation hub in Tampa, Florida. So that is what I do today.
So we're going to dive super far into that because
I know it's a lot.
I'm an entrepreneur. I am exploring, I'm curious like on picking your brain a little bit from an investor's perspective because I know a lot of people are interested in raising capital right now. But before we get there, like I want to know how you got into sports. Like I'm super fascinated with people's backgrounds and like how they ended up in collegiate level or professional level sports. So what was it? Like how did you get started? And what was it about football that made you want to go into college and play as a collegiate level athlete?
I mean, for me, it was as ingrained in my family as athletics could be. So both my parents were athletes, and from a very young age, that was our extracurricular. And so we always were in athletics. Played three sports growing up, and I always joke around with my parents. They sent four kids to college to play sports, and so they were 4 for 4 with that. And actually, football, I was never allowed to play football. So I was always big. I always would have had to like wear the sweatsuit and like the plastic bag to lose weight to be on the team. So I was never allowed to play football until I was a freshman in high school. And from the moment I stepped on the football field, it's what I literally had always wanted to do from the time I was in the backyard playing football by myself. And from that moment on, those next 4 years in high school were just tremendous. And then by the time I got to be a junior, started getting attention and started getting some opportunities to play at the next level. and ultimately led me to North Carolina, which was an amazing opportunity. And so for me, it was just the family. We've always been around athletics. We've always been about athletics, and it's just been such a vital part of my life from the get go.
And I would imagine like being surrounded by an athletic family, like there's some serious competition. So did all of your siblings play football as well, or what sports were they into?
No, so there's two boys and two girls, right? So my sisters both played basketball and volleyball, and were very good. I was joke with my older sister. She played Division I basketball at a very small school, and they made the tournament multiple times. And every time they played Connecticut or University of Tennessee in the first round. So amazing experiences, but very competitive. I can remember being really young and playing against my older sister in basketball, and she at the time she was always taller than me, so it was it was tough games, but very competitive. My little sister and little brother, we have a bit of a gap, so they're 4 and 6 years younger than me, so we didn't have as much of an opportunity to compete, but I think that may have been where I first got my glimpse into like coaching, because I was always in the backyard with them, organizing the kickball game or the baseball game or whatever it was in the backyard, and playing with them. And my brother does play football. He plays football to this day. He's a wide receiver in the Canadian Football League.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so tell me, I have a ton of student athletes that listen in to this show. And so I want to inspire, especially the newer student athletes, as they're going from high school into college. There's a big transition there. I've got a stepson that plays baseball at Willamette, and that's a big transition to go from high school sports into collegiate level sports. So if you were giving advice to anybody that is a new collegiate level athlete, what would you give to them?
Two pieces. First would be go in understanding that most likely, unless you are an absolute outlier, it's going to be a very humbling experience. So, and I mean, it was for me. A lot of us are the best in our small pond many times in high school, and then if you get an opportunity to go on to the next level, you know that population just shrunk. So it's it's so much more difficult, and you need to really turn it into a craft if you haven't yet, where for the majority of us, talent can take us a certain distance, and for most of us that have played college sports, college is that first time that you get humbled and you realize you need to show up every day, really ready to work and really ready to practice hard and put in all the extras in order to stand out the same way you did just a year earlier. And the second piece of advice would be, truly as a student athlete, is the advice that my high school football coach gave to me as I was leaving high school and going to college. And that was, as a student athlete, the football program or the baseball program or any program, they are going to get everything they can out of you as a member of their program. And it's on you to make sure in return you get everything you can out of that university or that college. And I really took that to heart, um, and really always had that focus to make sure that when all is said and done, I need to make sure that I leave this university with something really valuable beyond just the experience of being a member of an athletics team.
So, what did you learn in college? So, I've got a lot of people that, especially entrepreneurs, that may or may not have actually gone to college themselves. But what were some of the principles that you learned in college itself?
So in college itself, so I had an opportunity to go to really large universities. So I had the opportunity to really see that there are areas where you can excel, and it's on you to go find those areas and see where you can really pick your spots to go and thrive. And I think it's important, especially as entrepreneurs, to understand what you're great at or understand what you're building at, and then find ways to get involved in those communities, involved in those groups, and really give yourself an opportunity to stand out and be great. And that was one big thing I learned going from like high school in a smaller size town to a big giant university. It's like I need to pick my spots, and I need to go find where I can go thrive and push myself to thrive.
So, I know mentorship and coaching is incredibly important to you. So, did you have incredible mentors that you looked up to at the collegiate level as well, where you were a student athlete and you were working with them on more of a mentor mentee relationship at that point as well in your career?
Yeah, I did. And it's funny, it wasn't, oh, so I had some amazing coaches in college, and they were very impactful on many fronts, but it really centered around athletics and my ability to show up every day and treating my athletics like that's my profession, and really coming to work, putting in the work and putting in the homework. But for me, even beyond that was our support staff. And I think specifically about a couple of people in our academic support staff that's really focused on Lewis as a person beyond athletics, and always keeping me focused on the fact that there's something beyond this. So what are you preparing for? Are you preparing for business school? Are you preparing to, whatever it may be, what's next and how do we help you get there? And those, I mean, I can name Cynthia is one, just to throw a name out. And she was amazing. She was always so focused on helping me in terms of staying focused on how do you always look forward and look, a couple steps ahead in front of in terms of my academic planning, my internships, and so on and so forth.
So how was that transition for you? Like when you went from college sports, obviously you didn't play professionally, correct? You went from
Correct.
college
Yep.
into the business world. You went into education. So how was that transition for you?
It was weird because there was transition, and then there was also areas that weren't transition. So on the coaching and the athletics front, many things were very similar because I was coaching and in athletic administration at a very large school in a football hotbed, if you will. So I was again around a bunch of former college athletes, a bunch of former professional athletes, and very much never lacked that sense of camaraderie or that sense of competition because I had it on the football side of things. But for me personally, I had to get used to, on the education side of things, working as a professional and not everything being about my performance and my personal performance. And if I perform well, the team performs well. And understanding that that's not how everything is gauged from the education side of things. And I just try and choose my words carefully. But I just remember on my first day of teaching, receiving a piece of paper that essentially told me what I would make from the school district for like the next 30 years. And for me, being a very competitive person, like that was hard. Like it was hard. I wanted to know, like, well, there has to be, like, this can't be it. So just understanding to like work within the bureaucracy and work within the structure and finding other ways to add value both to your income but add value to the overall group. It was a big transition in terms of the school side of things. The sports was same old.
Same old sports. So we've got a couple people popping in. So Nathan popped in and he asked an interesting question. He said that kind of played very well into where we're at right now. He said, what are your thoughts on the transfer portal now in college for these athletes?
So I think it's an interesting question. And what I can say is I think the old process was definitely not the best process. I think college athletes need to have, right, there's a balance between trying to make sure we instill values like, loyalty, and that's not even the best word to use, but just sticking something out, like not always looking for the easiest, like, where's the exit? If it doesn't work right away, where's the exit? How do I go somewhere else? And I don't think those are good things to teach, but there are very real situations where transferring is the absolute best option for all parties involved. And that process should be made as easy as possible for players, in my opinion.
Gotcha. And then we've got Jason popping in. And this is an interesting question as well. He said, what style of leadership resonates with you the most and why? And I want to dive a little bit deeper into that from as an athlete perspective, as well as from being an employee, because I feel like there's similarities there, but there's also two totally different leadership styles. And you've got to be able to translate that between sports and business as well. So I want to kind of pick your brain on both sides of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I learned so much about leadership. Right, leadership is one of those things that you very much learn from doing, not so much from watching or reading, although those are important supplements. And I learned so much about leadership in all the careers I had after coaching and after teaching, when I wish I could have flipped that, because I learned so much in sales. And I was very much a leader that led by my actions in terms of When I came in, I was the hardest working sales rep. I was the hardest working seller. There was, you know, one of my old managers used to make fun of me because I had a line at one point in time. I had an argument with a teammate, and he was talking about how he needed time for his family, which is important, except he was single and young. And I was like, you know, I don't go to bed. I just fall asleep whenever I'm done working. Like just the mindset of I go until I stop. And so I expected the same thing from people around me. And I learned very quickly when I started getting into leadership roles that that's not the best way to lead necessarily. Just because you are good at going 1,000 miles a minute and charging, that's not the best way to lead people. And so when you ask what's the best form of leadership, in my opinion, you have to be able to be adaptable to your people, and you have to be able to utilize many different forms of leadership, because there may be somebody that will thrive knowing you're able to grind all day and all night. And so they want to do it as well. But there may be that employee right next to them, or that coworker right next to them that needs a very different style of leadership. And the best leaders are able to use the appropriate form for the group or the person they're trying to lead.
I love that answer. Oh my goodness, that is amazing. So we've got Rupa popping in too, and Rupa's asking, this goes back into the transition side of things. She said, "What was the toughest lesson you learned post athletic career that you wish you had learned earlier in your career?"
Yeah, that performance isn't the end all be all. And as an athlete, I mean, unless you are unless you are absolutely toxic, performance is the most important thing, right? You need to be a good teammate, but you don't necessarily have to be the nicest, friendliest person all the time. But you learn very quickly in the workplace that like there's a lot that goes into being a really quality employee and a really quality coworker that goes beyond just your numbers or beyond just the quality of your work. And it's how you interact with others, how you lead others, how you are led by others. And for me, that was honestly a learning curve. And not, you can't handle all situations like you handle them in the locker room or like you handle them on the field. You need to understand that you are dealing with a much broader spectrum of personalities, and it's important that you put those relationships on the forefront of your mind and nurture them, or else there's going to come a time when your performance just isn't enough to deal with poor attitude or whatever it may be.
And some of that behavior can turn into toxicity. Like I saw that a lot as far as corporate toxicity is concerned. And that's a whole other conversation to dive in at another time. But I'm really curious from your perspective. So a lot of athletes go into sales and marketing because they do have that unique discipline and that unique focus and somewhat of that grit and determination to succeed in those types of roles. So how did you go from like education into sales?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So honestly, when I initially left teaching, I continued on and went into just a purely administrative athletic administration role, but only stayed for about 4 months because I randomly bumped into someone I knew that had an opportunity that was trying to fill a few opportunities in the medical device space. And what really stuck for me was from the very even the interview process, you could just feel the competition. You could just feel like this is a really, really lofty goal. The background doesn't necessarily match, but I can just tell by the conversations I'm having with these people that I can win this and I can get this. And I just felt that immediately in the sales world and specifically the medical device space. And that I was just drawn to that. And that's how I
So,
ended up in sales.
well, in healthcare, so like, athletes somewhat also are interested in the healthcare space just because of their background and their nature. But I also come from a healthcare sales, SaaS technology background, and it's really a tough industry to sell into. I mean, it truly, truly is a tough industry. There's a lot of loophole, like there's a lot of like red tape you have to go through, long sales cycles, very challenging. I mean, people's lives are literally at stake in these environments at times, and so it's a
Mm-hmm.
very challenging, high stress environment. So how did you kind of come over that learning curve in the medical device space, because it's a big one, like it's a big one to go and learn all of the things that you need to know to thrive on the medical side of things, and not just on the medical side of things but also on the sales side too?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that was what that was one of the things I love most about. I'm almost like addicted to that learning curve, and that's one of the things that I love most about where I sit today as a venture investor, especially as a generalist, is that that learning curve starts from scratch. On any deal, it could be something super interesting in a space that we don't necessarily know that specific space, and the learning curve starts all over again. And I have a short amount of time to get as caught up as I can, or else we're going to lose a deal. We're not going to be able to prove our value to that entrepreneur, and we're not going to be able to invest some dollars that could really, be impactful. For me, it was just, it went back to studying playbooks. It went back to putting in extra work on the field. It was like, I knew I also had a good friend in the space that like let me know that whatever they say to you about the time, if they say it's going to take 2 years, I did it in 18 months. So I was automatically, well, if you did it in 18 months, then I got to do it in at least 18 months. So I knew that regardless of how much I don't know today, that there's an end. And if I put in the time, I'll get there. And I've just put in the time and put in the effort and was able to see tangible results. I think that's what I liked most about it, is you could test yourself quickly. Like you could study and learn and then go talk to a client and see if you really know your stuff, especially in the medical space. Because if you get in a conversation with a doctor and you don't know your stuff, you're going to you're going to get called on it pretty quickly.
Yeah, they're going to know real quickly. And, once again, it's a high stress environment, but it's very similar in nature to that of sports at times. I mean,
Yep.
there's a lot of similarities, which is why I think a lot of former athletes are drawn towards the sales roles, is because of that specific competitive nature, but also the challenge. I mean, it's a significant challenge. And I don't know. So if you are listening in and you don't come from a sales background, I want to know, on a scale 1 to 10, how traumatizing picking up the phone and making a cold call would be for you right now. Because a lot of people are terrified of making cold calls. And so if somebody's listening in that may be new to sales or is a new entrepreneur that's having to sell, what are some of the best pieces of advice or tips that you would give to them to get on the phone with somebody?
Yeah, honestly, it would just be, if I was talking to an entrepreneur, it would just be the value of gaining that experience as your company's earliest salesperson, right? Especially as a founder, you should almost take ownership of that. No one understands what you've built the way you do, and no one understands the problem you're envisioning solving the way you do. And so just have the confidence to speak, your truth about what you know and about how you are solving a true problem. And then don't be afraid to share that with prospective customers. And I would say the most important thing is, it's true, people don't love being sold to. So don't go trying to sell people. Try and understand people, and then try and understand how you can convey your solution to them, more so than how do I sell, right? It's not like, I think selling gets a bad connotation, where if we use like different words, like pick up the phone and try and understand what their problem is unique to them. That doesn't sound as traumatizing as go sell to them, in my opinion. So if you just get on the phone and start easy, start with just trying to have a conversation and understanding their needs, and then go from there, and you'll build a rapport. And if you build a product or a service like you think you have, then you'll understand how that fits into their solution, and you'll be able to offer it to them in a compelling way.
I also want to encourage people. So, how many times have you been hung up on? Like, it happens. Like, regardless of what you're doing, when you're making calls or you're trying to develop relationships, like, it sometimes just doesn't pan out. And that means it's not the correct opportunity, but it should not prohibit you from pushing forward to actually put forth the work to make the calls and to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been hung up on numerous times. And also, so a majority of my selling, so when I was in medical device, we were actually in the OR. So our job had two functions. One, if we closed a deal and a surgeon was going to use, our knee replacement for his next 10 surgeries, we needed to be in there with him during those 10 surgeries, helping him through those surgeries. And so we would see our other prospects face to face in the hospital. So it's not even like being hung up on over a phone. It's like being hung up on in person, when you try and talk to them at the scrub sink, you try and talk to them in the cafeteria, and there's residents around and fellows around and other sales reps around, and you just get, I mean, honestly, just played out like, no, I would never use your company's products. And it's not even anything about our company. It's just that's how that doctor felt that day. And so you just have
Well,
to
and you're
deal with
stuck
like,
in there. So I also
yeah,
come from an
right.
OR background. Like when you're in there, you're in there. You can't, it's not like you can just casually get
No,
out of the conversation. Like you're in there, you have to take it and still be polite and kind and just deal with it and recognize,
yeah,
oh, this is not a good quality opportunity. So we're just going to move on with it.
absolutely. Absolutely. You have thick skin. And the no's get easier, right? That's what everyone says. And I guess it's true. You get used to hearing it and you understand you can't take it personal. You should never take it personal.
Agreed. So, how did you get from, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I really want to dive into this piece around entrepreneurship because I know you have a significant passion for entrepreneurship and some of the work that you're doing right now. So, when you were in medical device sales, like when did you realize, hey, I want to go in a little bit different direction? And what inspired you to do so?
Yeah, so it's actually like a somewhat interesting story. So the day I got hired, like the day I started, my company announced a gigantic merger with another like top 5 competitor. So my first 18 months was like these two ginormous multinational companies combining and going through all that junk that comes with a merger and combining two sales forces. And the company that we purchased was private equity backed. And so from actually the very beginning of my sales career, I was like super intrigued by like what that meant and what is this whole like, mergers and acquisitions and what does it mean to be PE backed. And I started like on the side diving into like the world of finance just to understand it better. And after that settled down and those first 18 months went by and we were one united company, we started buying a bunch of startups to fill like little holes in our product portfolio. So we would have like one small thing missing in one body part and we would buy a startup. And we went on a clip where we bought like a startup a month for like 6 or 9 months. And that got me super intrigued by like, what is that journey like from idea to the moment where now you can be purchased by an enormous company or even beyond that, go on to IPO or whatever it may be. And so that's when I got like enthralled by that idea of like zero to like now I've arrived on the scene. And that's what really led me to diving into the world of entrepreneurship and the world of startups.
So, what was common? Like, what was a commonality between a lot of these companies aside from just like filling a niche? Like, what was maybe a commonality between all these companies that were getting purchased? Because, I think a lot of people, it's daunting to jump into entrepreneurship for a lot of different reasons. I mean, we're living it right now, and I could go on and on and on about some of the challenges that entrepreneurs face, but some of the significant areas of opportunity. And so if you're looking at it from like a huge company perspective, to get to that point is such a long trek.
Mm-hmm.
But you see significant success in a lot of small companies that focus on very small niche products that do really, really well in growing those products. And that eventually go through some type of merger and acquisition with a larger company like what you were describing. So what have you seen just in that process, specifically around the medical device piece, that was like somewhat of a commonality for some of these companies that were getting acquired?
I think you named it, and that was a very like almost a laser focus and a very clear mission to solve what they were trying to solve, and not being, there were other targets that targets out there that maybe had almost as good a product, but that wasn't their all their focus. They were more spread and more scattered, and you really couldn't get a beat on what their clear mission was. And the companies that we purchased, we had a very clear need, right? And so we purchased organizations that they were very clear. Their sales team that we were going to take in, their everything from the top down was focused and knew what their mission was. Their mission was to fix hammer toes, right? Or whatever it is. Their mission was to fix like meniscal tears. And so just having that clear, and that's transferable well beyond medical device or medical technology, but just understanding where you sit and having a really clear focus and mission on serving that space is something that I saw as a commonality across all those organizations that we bought.
So I've had some interesting conversations with some people about this. So people talk about elevator pitches, right? And we're not going to dive into specifically the venture side yet, but when it comes to elevator pitches, that was a very specific requirement of a sales representative. But what I have also implemented is an individual pitch. So if somebody asks, "Hey, tell me a little bit about yourself," you're not just selling for your company, you're sharing a little bit about you as an individual. Have you implemented something like that before? Have you heard other people that have taken elevator pitches and maybe used them for multiple different use cases?
So a couple of things. Yes, I've been through so many elevator pitch like practices, and I'm adamantly not a fan in terms of like, don't time me for a 2 minute elevator pitch. That's going to be the entire elevator ride, and we haven't had a conversation. I'm much more about conversations. But in terms of on the personal side, I think it's super important, and that's something I learned um, when I was trying to get into the venture space, and that was you need to get your story together. You need to be able to tell your story. And then every time you share it, try and get some feedback, try and see what's working, and then continue to refine your story. And I think that's important for any entrepreneur. And I mean, in today's day and age, I think that's so important for like any professional. And I would say, especially something important to learn for athletes, right? Because a lot of times we say, you can just push the tape and see what I can do, right? As an athlete, you don't necessarily have to go out and sell it verbally. Whereas in the professional world, that's not you can't do that. You need to
It
be
doesn't
able
work.
to,
Like they
right?
don't
You have to
they,
articulate it.
like and that's the thing that I found with so many athletes as well is like they're like, "Well, this is what I did." And it's like,
Yeah,
well, these organizations care about what you bring to the table and how you can drive value for them now, not necessarily what you did. And
yeah,
like in sales, you're conditioned like every single month or every single quarter, or every single year, you start from scratch. Like
yep, absolutely.
it's you start from scratch. And so you get into this position of being comfortable with starting over and starting from ground zero to
Yeah,
some degree.
I think that's an important part about a personal elevator pitch, and especially as athletes, like your elevator pitch should be, and I'm making these numbers up, so but it should be like 20% what you did, and then that should lead into a conversation about how that's going to transfer into what you're going to do into the future. It can't be 80% about what I did, especially when as an athlete, you've learned many, many tangible and transferable skills, but that doesn't necessarily come across. So, what you did as an athlete, you need to be able to package that into a small bit and then be able to convey how you're going to utilize those skills into being a really impactful professional.
So let's go back to so you went from medical device, you got really interested in mergers and acquisitions and you started diving into the whole investment space and you went into school again, like you got an
Yeah.
additional degree. And then once you got into like what was your journey after you got that degree?
So, like I said, my journey after I got the degree was just internships. So it started with internship in finance, not directly in venture capital, but in a search fund. So essentially, an entrepreneur that wants to be an entrepreneur through acquisition and not by building something from the ground up. So he raised capital, and him and his group wanted to go purchase a company that then they could go run as entrepreneurs. And so I worked with them, and that taught me a lot of great skills in terms of diving into companies, doing due diligence, understanding what's a good deal, what's a bad deal, so on and so forth. And I leveraged that into a couple other fellowship opportunities. And during those fellowships is when I was introduced to the amazing people at Embark Collective in Tampa. And I had an opportunity to start diving into their ecosystem that they're building in Tampa, which is amazing I mean, it's very similar to what they're building in Nashville in terms of just really a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem, and got an opportunity to start working with founders all the time and working with startups all the time, which really I feel like was a huge leg up as I continued my recruiting path into venture, because then I could speak to real life experience that I had in terms of providing support and being very much a value added person to entrepreneurs and to startups, which is very much needed as an early stage investor.
So you are a lifelong learner. Like it's very evident that you have zero problems
Yeah.
with diving into something that you may not know a whole lot about, but like becoming proficient or working proficiency in what you're
Yeah.
talking about. So what are some resources like if you could give just 3 of your top resources that would be like your go-to learning
Yeah.
pieces, what would those be?
Like for me specific in my spaces, so number one is a book called Venture Deals.
Okay.
And it's like the so it's not a book you pick up and read start to finish. At least I hope you want it. But it's a book that if you have a conversation that you need to talk about anything having to do with venture capital deals, you can refer to that book, and it's going to give you what you need to know. And I'm that's not a unique answer. Almost anyone, it was referred to me right when I first got started, um, and that was super impactful. And then you can pick your blog, whether it's like John Gannon's blog or Axios Pro Rata, but just read, just find stuff that you want to read about deals that are happening. And then the one thing I learned about learning and is being at the ground floor of a learning curve, in my opinion, the fastest way you get to the top and the fastest way you find your own path of expertise is just finding like going down the rabbit hole of what interests you. So like find some blogs that you like and start reading about deals and then just let your mind that's where you're going to be the most impactful. That's where you're going to learn the best is when you're digging into something like where your curiosity is firing. And so just follow the rabbit hole and go learn. I mean, we have so many amazing resources. I'll give one specific one. If you're an entrepreneur or an investor and you really want some tactical good advice, Unusual Ventures has a what do they call it? I don't know if they call it a playbook. I think they call it their playbook. You can find it right on their website, and it's like such an amazing resource in terms of go to market, in terms of sales, marketing, pipeline, anything you could want to dive into if you're just trying to, become an expert in a space.
So let's dive into some of these questions. So I want to dive into the entrepreneur side. So, what's the biggest obstacle that one must overcome to be successful in entrepreneurship? So, that's from Jason as well.
I think that's a really good question, a really tough question. I think it changes as you grow as an entrepreneur and as you think about your stage of your company. And I think in the early days, I would say from what I see a lot, entrepreneurs they get very much tunnel vision, and it's what they're best at. So if you're an entrepreneur who's very good at building like a product, you may get tunnel vision and go into a room and just start building your product without remembering to go talk to the people that you're trying to sell it to, right? Without getting out of the building and going and talking to prospective customers so you can bring in that feedback. Or it could go vice versa. If you're very much a people person, you're very much talking, you just have a great idea. Well, you can't talk to people all day long and just keep building that great idea without actually putting pen to paper and starting to craft an amazing product or an amazing service to go along with it. So I would say remembering to play to your strengths, but also that your weaknesses are super important, especially in the early stage when very often you're a solopreneur and you're working by yourself. You're everything, and very few of us, certainly not me, are good at all the things that are needed to build a business. So understand your weak spots and learn how to do them proficiently until you can get help to do them yourself. And then I would say growing as a leader as your business grows is something that can trip an entrepreneur up and can, I mean, honestly cause your company to outgo you, which is fine sometimes. Some people are very much 0 to 1. But if your vision is to grow a very nice company and continue to be in charge of that very nice company, then you need to grow as a leader.
So, what are some things that you would give to an entrepreneur as far as like, I see a lot of people that want to launch companies, and I see a lot of people that want to go from their corporate roles and make that transition over to entrepreneurship. And as I alluded earlier, it is a very daunting thing to do. I mean, even when we did it, like it was a very big challenge, not just to actually make the decision and do it, but to figure out how to navigate all the different things. So if you've got somebody that's listening in that really wants to make that shift, what are some words of advice or encouragement that you would give to them?
I mean, I'll start with a bit of a joke. I heard another investor give some really good advice of what do you tell someone that's saying they want to start a company? And they would say the first thing I would tell them is don't do it. And I tell them don't do it again and don't do it again. Because for one reason, if they listen to that advice and they don't do it, that's not really you really weren't cut out to do it, right? You need to be so laser focused on what you want to do because it's going to be really tough, right? There's not going to be a 401k and there's not going to be a steady paycheck and there's not going to be a structure that's already in place. And so you really have to be all in terms of understanding that being an entrepreneur is completely different than working in a corporate environment. And
And
within a
sometimes
corporate
that can be
structure.
a really long journey. Like, and that's what people, I think, I've talked to a lot of new entrepreneurs as we're in this journey too. And people put a lot of pressure on that financial paycheck because that's what they're conditioned to. And that is not typically what entrepreneurship looks like. You need to have a decent runway and know
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
specifically about your financial position to be able to do it, but to do it for a length of time. And I think a lot of new entrepreneurs put a lot of pressure on themselves around that.
Yeah, and you don't. I think you talk about that runway, and that's super important because if you're building something from scratch, you can't really project when that's going to start hitting. It could be quicker than you ever expected, or it could take longer. And the last thing you want to do is to be in a position where you've spent a lot of time building something that you are very confident is going to be really good, but you run out of that runway like 6 months too soon before you get to really start to put things into motion. So it's risky, right? And I think you need to understand those risks and you need to do as much as you can to mitigate those risks, both on the front end and as you start embarking on that journey.
So we've got a couple of questions popping in, and I'm going to ask this one first, Krista. So Krista asked, should a startup's pitch deck be altered for each specific target audience, such as one version for a VC, another for an accelerator, and then another version for a website?
I mean, I think so. If you're thinking, so I'm going to give two like a harder comparison or stronger comparison, if you will. If you're talking a VC pitch deck versus a sales deck, yes, they should very much be different in terms of pitching to a prospective customer versus pitching to a VC. If you're talking about an accelerator, I think it depends on what the focus of that accelerator is. I think there could be some merit to changing it, but I think I wouldn't be so focused on do I need to tweak this deck a little bit, because I think the important things should stay the same. And that's conveying who you are as an entrepreneur, who your team is, what problem you're solving, and why you are the people to be solving that problem. And as long as you convey that to an investor, to an accelerator, or whoever it may be, that's what's important to hit and to crush.
So you mentioned earlier a good deal and a bad deal. And I know there's a lot of things that play into this, but I'd really love to know from your perspective, what do you identify some characteristics of a good deal?
Yeah, so a good deal in the early stage for us, it starts with like a super compelling founder that we can just like you have to be able to sell us, right? Like we have to believe in your vision. And it's not often a long amount of time, but in 2 or 3 meetings, we really need to feel the vision that you're going after. And then it needs to be in a space where we see opportunity for a really large, where we see room for a really large opportunity. So what makes not an exciting deal is something like Me Too and I'm talking tech here, like Me Too products where someone else has already done it and you're just making it marginally better. That does not give me confidence that from a venture return standpoint, where we want one investment should be able to return our entire fund. So we're looking for like 7, 8, 9, 10x, type of returns, that we need. It needs to be an opportunity for a game-changing business that you're building. So it's a founding team plus the opportunity, like the space that you're building in.
So
Prove to me that there's a white space. Prove to me that you're building in a unique area, I would say.
So she has another question, and this goes into cryptocurrency. So there's a lot going on in blockchain and NFTs and the metaverse. And this is very specific around that. So, what do you think about cryptocurrency, blockchain tech, NFTs, the metaverse, coming Web 3.0, in regards to its potential effect on the sports industry, both real world and esports alike?
I mean, I think we're already starting to see the impacts on both real world sports industry and esports. I think ultimately, if you look at the size of the impact, I think esports and the metaverse and NFTs and blockchain are going to be synonymous. Like that's where esports is going to live eventually, in my opinion. So it's going to have a much larger impact on that. But when you think about blockchain technology, you think about cryptocurrency and the metaverse, and then you think about other changes in the sports industry, like sports betting. I think those two things are going to have major impacts with each other. So I think it's going to have a lot of impacts on the sports industry. And I think a lot of them are going to be good changes and good impacts. I see a lot of things coming out about athletes doing some really interesting things with NFTs and new and different ways of doing their volunteer work and their charities, and running that with NFTs, and just how it really kind of flips. It used to be a really heavy lift for a lot of athletes to do that volunteer work and to set up those charities, and bringing in the NFT world and the cryptocurrency space, I think really makes for some interesting opportunities.
So what are some things? So you guys invest very early stage from a generalist perspective. So
Yeah.
what are some things that are exciting you right now within the investment space itself? So are there trends or, areas of opportunity where you're seeing, innovation happening, and what are some areas that you're getting really excited about?
Yeah, so there's so many amazing areas. Three that pop into my head automatically are number one, there's so much changing in dealing with employees. And so I think about like the HR space, and that's anything from like learning and development for employees, benefits for employees. I think the benefit space, and you think about beyond just traditional benefits. I mean, there's a stat out there that something like 80% of employees would prefer additional benefits over increase in pay. And so I think being able to offer at scale fringe benefits and lifestyle benefits is something that's really important. And then when you think about the difficulty in finding and retaining talent, that plays very much into learning and development. So just really like reskilling and upskilling our workforce, I think is vital, and some interesting things there. I think from a fintech standpoint, you look at things like Robinhood, and I think more and more democratizing access to interesting investment opportunities is something that we're going to continue to see. So you think about all the things you used to have to be an accredited investor to do, like really invest in a venture capital fund or invest in a PE fund. You needed to have $1 million of net worth between yourself or you and your spouse, even more than that, or you needed to make at least 250K for the last couple of years. And now there are both legislation and platforms coming out to really democratize that. And then another area that we look at and that I find super interesting is when you look at mortgages and the housing crisis, different ways to just what it means to be able to own property or own a piece of a property as a homeowner. And we've actually invested in a couple of opportunities that are really flipping that on its head and thinking of new ways to right. It's either rent or own, and there has to be something like rent or a 30-year mortgage that I can't even afford, or I can't get the down payment for, or I can't get approved for. Like there needs to be something else, and that's a space that we're really focused on.
So if you are a new founder listening, so in like raising capital, investments, like the whole scenario can be very daunting, and it's a lot to learn. Like there's a lot as a new founder, especially if you don't have a background in raising capital or venture or all of these different components. it's a big learning curve. So when you are talking to new founders and advising or mentoring them, at what point do you recommend that they start down the raising capital perspective? So is there ever a point where it's too early, in your opinion, to start raising capital?
I mean, there's not a defined too early that is an overarching answer for every company out there and every geography out there, right? Like we invest coast to coast, but we really like secondary markets and underserved markets. And that's not the same as San Fran. Like, no, you can have an idea and you can raise some capital in Silicon Valley, especially as a repeat founder. But the majority of startups and the majority of entrepreneurs, I do think there's a point that it's too early. And I would say you need to raise capital when you have gotten to a point where you can very clearly define what you're raising capital for, how long you're projecting that capital to last, and exactly not exactly, but clear objectives into where that capital is going to bring you in terms of this is going to allow us to use these marketing strategies, and because of those marketing strategies, it's going to allow us to gain 55 new customers over the next 6 to 12 months. And we believe that because we've tested it on this side. So essentially, when you know exactly how much you can utilize and exactly how you're going to utilize it and what that time frame looks like, when you can be super clear about those things, I think you can go out and raise some capital.
And I just want to make the caution that we are not giving financial advice.
No, not. I thought that was on the bottom somewhere or something.
Yeah, we're
Not at
not
all.
giving, we are having a discussion. We are not giving financial advice. So please just know that this is a topic discussion around these specific areas of opportunity. So I want to say, like, from your perspective, and I'm super curious on this one. And if anybody else has a question, definitely drop one because we do have a couple of minutes left. And I want to make sure that I answer any questions that you may have. What are some misconceptions from an investor's perspective about the investing space as a whole?
I mean, I think that's a super good question. So misconceptions by investors about investors or about investing is the question, correct? Let me make sure I have it straight.
Yep.
um, I would say I'll give my answer from being on the outside and coming into the inside. And I would say the view about how many experts there are or are not in the space may be misconstrued from the outside. And I think you can really have a large impact on founders and entrepreneurs if you commit to truly becoming an expert in your craft and being along for the journey. And so many amazing investors are like that. But from the outside looking in, you would think that that's how every investor is, and that's not the case.
And how do you not go down the rabbit hole? Like, if you could give like a very high snapshot about the different types of investing pathways. So what people have asked, like, what's the difference between pre-seed, seed? Like, give a very brief snapshot. So for anybody listening that may not have a significant detailed overview understanding of raising capital, just give a little bit of almost like an education.
Yeah, I'll try and make it
education
super
piece.
quick and surface level. So if you have an idea, if you have an early business thought, or if you've started to build a business, that's a really good time to tap friends and family if you're fortunate enough to have that network. Once you start to build and once you start to put together what a product might look like, what your market looks like, who you're going to be selling to, that's a good time to start tapping angel networks. And as you start to really, I have a product, I'm about to launch a product, I have an MVP, I've launched my MVP, I maybe have some early pilots or some early customers that should turn into paying customers. That's a good time to start thinking about maybe like a pre-seed round. When we talk about seed, that's you're really starting to approach some, some traction and some product market fit. And then I would say the biggest chasm is between that seed round and getting to the A round, because in order to raise an A round, you need, in most geographies and in most situations, you need to have proven product market fit. We've built a product that is serving a need, and we've identified who that target market is, and they're buying what we're selling. And all we need now, we need some capital to just amplify our efforts, build out our team, and really hit it. And then B and C and D, that's not for me. That's like when you start to grow big and it's time to really like scale out a team of like multiple people.
Well, and that's when like the merger and acquisition, like that's the
Yeah.
whole thought. That's when you get to that space. So share a little bit more. We've got like a couple minutes, and I want to definitely be respectful of you and everybody else's time that's listening in. So share a little bit more about Idea Fund Partners. I'm going to drop a link. So if anybody is listening in that wants to submit an early stage idea or pitch deck, this is the link to do so. But do you want to share a little bit more about Idea Fund Partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So Idea Fund Partners, we are actually one of like the oldest and most active early stage VCs in the Southeast. So we're about 15 years old. Our founding partners, Lister Delgado and John Cambier, they first invested together starting about 20 years ago out of a group called NC Idea, which was a grant writing fund in North Carolina. They spun out of that and launched our first IFP1, which was a very small fund focused just on North Carolina. As we grew, we expanded our geography and focused on the Southeast. And then with our latest fund, Fund 3, which we just finished deploying, we really deployed capital coast to coast. We did a bunch of deals out of Canada. And now we are actively raising and writing checks we're currently fundraising and also investing out of our next fund. And what we really like to look for is, first and foremost, we love being able to identify underserved founders in underserved markets. And I think that's really a broad term, but it can any underdog, any underserved or overlooked geography, market, business idea, or founder is something that really excites us. Now, will we invest in your prototypical founder out of San Fran? Yeah, like we will. We absolutely will. But is when we think about what we wake up and we go out and look for and what we want to find, and is, that overlooked space, that company building out of Baltimore, that company building out of Mississippi that is a really thoughtful founder solving a really big problem that might not have the same access to capital that everyone else has. And we really like to look to be there and be an early partner and help them scale. And that's kind of the way we invest. We like to be active, and we like to help entrepreneurs reach their really audacious goals.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being a guest on the show and sharing all of these helpful tips and tricks. I mean, we've literally talked about a million different topics and just scratched the surface in so many different areas. But I can't thank you enough for joining, and for everybody that once again continues to listen into the show. I'm confident that this has been like an awesome episode where there's so much to take back as far as tips and tricks. Krista, we will make sure to follow up with you in regards to your last question. But Lewis, what's the best way for people to stay afloat in your journey? So individually, rather than just the company perspective, but what are the best way for people to get in touch with you or to stay connected to you?
Yeah, I honestly, the best way is probably through social, through LinkedIn or Twitter. I not the most active, but I'm there. You can see what I'm doing, and you can see what we're looking at in terms of amplifying our portfolio companies and amplifying the amazing founders that we're backing. That's where you can find what we're up to, and that's where you can get in touch with me. I don't know if you have those links to drop, but if you search my name, you'll absolutely find me, and I'm more than happy to connect and with anybody.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. And to everybody listening in, Thank you. We do this every week, typically Tuesdays from 1 to 2, where I have the opportunity to highlight these incredible former athletes that are doing amazing things in business. So stay tuned. Follow, if we're not connected already, definitely connect with me so that we can definitely stay in contact with each other. So thank you so much again, and until next week.
Thanks, Amanda.